what this webinar is designed around is trying to give everybody some confidence in where they should take their marketing initiatives in this time of economic turbulence. I think for many, the impact of COVID-19 has been pretty devastating. It's affected people personally and commercially. I think that we've seen waves of redundancies, furloughing, hiring budget has been pulled, and it's to no surprise to probably most people on this call that marketing spend is being reduced or stopped in some circumstances, and targets can often still remain locked in. This is obviously raising a question now of like what to do next, and I suppose on this slide here that we have is just some of the conversations that we've been having with clients. So just to make some of these call outs, 65% of marketers anticipate a decrease to their marketing budget. 53% of B2B marketers have put new product launches under review and often on hold. Up to 60% of marketers are now pausing their marketing campaigns. And 72% of marketers predict that their goals will stay the same. So it doesn't really, these are bleak times in a sense. So I think this webinar, what we want to achieve from this webinar is to give everybody some value back from the conversations that we've been having as a collective agency working with a vast number of clients, to try and help you scenario plan and come out of this crisis stronger. Thanks, Phil. So I think one of the starting points that we wanted to look at is understanding how the effect, understanding the effect of COVID on deals closing. I think it's pretty universal that pipelines are shrinking across the globe, and what these charts try to demonstrate is how each different region is affected first and foremost. What we can see is demand globally is down. You can see in APAC, APAC was obviously the first region to be hit by COVID-19, and it obviously went on a sharp decline quite early on. What we can see in NEMA is it went on a sharper decline than the rest of the globe. You can see on the 12th of March, the US stocks hit a record low, right back until like 1987. So these are pretty unprecedented times. EMEA as obviously continuing to go on a downward trajectory as things go into lockdown across various different countries, and LATAM is largely following suit. So I mean, what we can see from a deals perspective is demand is down, but what we want to demonstrate in this webinar is engagement is not necessarily down. Whilst demand is down, engagement is not. So I think it's really important to consider that when making marketing decisions against budget and understanding how your brand wants to come out of this situation. One of the key metrics here, which is pulled from one of HubSpot's webinars, is as people, I suppose, as demand is falling, people are turning to email, which is completely to be expected given it's free. So we're seeing sales emails ramp, but what we are seeing is response rates are dropping. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend email as a strategy to start like blasting and trying to communicate with your audience in that sense, because there's a decline. And then I suppose email has been in decline for a number of years, people turning to new channels to communicate with their audiences. What's clear is people are still researching. Traffic is on the rise, and it's universally on the rise. People are obviously at home more. We are seeing people engage more. Traffic is up. We're seeing just engagement rates across the board increase. Specifically, people are taking more time digesting content that they might not have done before. So it demonstrates that whilst a lot of people don't have the power to make purchasing decisions right now, they are actively researching, and what we might find is that they're ready to purchase once budgets become unlocked again. One thing that we have noticed across media channels specifically is with people being at home more, we're finding different patterns when it comes to their search patterns or how they're engaging with ads. For example, we're finding people are engaging with ads later in the day. We're finding a surge in desktop traffic again, which really does shake up how the really does turn on its head where trends have been going with the rise of mobile and how people engage. So these charts, so just to try explain these charts in a little bit more detail. So what we're seeing across these charts demonstrate what we're seeing across channels. What's clear is that there are trends to be had from these channels, and the main one is there is a decline in activity that's near the bottom of the funnel. And what I mean by that is like direct call to actions. So where campaigns are promoting demos, there is obviously reduced intent, which is forcing like CPAs to increase and performance is getting worse. On the flip side of that, what we're finding is that content-focused campaigns are absolutely on the rise, which is largely led by social channels. So just to walk through the charts one by one, in the top left-hand side, what we can see is minor declines in paid search budget. People are obviously pulling themselves out of the market. So this data set is specifically Ledger Bennett's clients. And we are seeing some paid search budget declining. People are reverting to core campaign groups to ensure that they stay in the market, but obviously don't spend as aggressively because the demand is down. So in short, paid search is declining. In paid social, on the contrary, is increasing. People are recognizing now that they can capture people at the top of the funnel for cheaper, which brings us on to the second chart. Average cost per click is falling across the board, but more significantly on social channels. What's clear is that it's a great time for people to try and build audiences for cheaper on social and drive results in that way at the top of the funnel. How the CPA is affected, you can see that the CPA trends are not as striking. You can see paid search is rising, paid social is generally on the decline. And ultimately what we can see in the bottom right-hand corner is conversion volume is increasing for paid social and significantly decreasing for paid search, which essentially comes back to the original call out of like direct call to actions are not necessarily appropriate for this climate, especially when the intent is down. People are now looking to brands to research and to capture more value, I suppose, higher up the funnel. What I want to pose a question to Tom. I know I've done a lot of talking, so I'm going to fire a question over to Tom. So I'd like to, Tom, if you can give us a little bit more context on what you're seeing across Ledger Bennett's clients on the whole.
Sure. So across the board, we're seeing data that internet traffic in general is up a massive 50%. We're also seeing that like Facebook saw a 70% increase from like the month of March year over year. So the visibility and the expansion of people who are actually engaging and visibility online is increasing. I took a look at this eMarketer study that essentially took everything year over year and analyzed March over March. And what they saw during the survey was outside of broadcast, cable, and digital video, the biggest hit that was taken for media channels was we saw the biggest pullback in display and paid social, which is semi-surprising because paid social has such a low CPM in general. It was kind of surprising that so many people are pulling those two off the market. We also saw paid search kind of stay stagnant between the spend limits year over year. So specifically jumping into channels, what we've seen with our own clients is that Facebook has historically low CPAs. I had a client go from like October to January, we were averaging $80 or $90 per lead form fill. And then once we got to like a March and an April, it dropped down to $20 to $30. So as everybody pulls their media off that channel, the inventory got much less expensive. So we were able to accelerate the growth of these through putting more creative assets on that market. As we're getting through April and into May, it'll probably spike back up a bit. I've already seen some of the CPAs begin to grow again. On Instagram, it's got a similar curve to Facebook. So the CPAs went down, the conversion volume went up, but it's kind of increasing back to a bit more aggressively than Facebook. Paid search specifically has remained relatively flat over time. We've seen volume increases in some conversions, but I think some of the conversion rates have dropped. We're seeing a lot of people enter the pipeline, but then not progress through the pipeline. So they're approaching the sales and they're saying, yes, I'm interested. I just can't commit at this moment. So we're getting a good amount of engagement. We're getting a good amount of people entering the funnel. Then we just need to figure out how to take care of those and nurture those. LinkedIn specifically has been increased engagement and visibility. So likes, shares, posts are getting a ton, because I think a lot of people are out of work right now, and that's the channel that they're choosing to scroll through news feeds, kind of engage on, interact with people. So there's a lot of people on LinkedIn right now, a lot of good traffic. It's just tough for the hard sell. So what we've done with a lot of our LinkedIn campaigns is we've softened the language. So instead of saying request a demo, try for the direct sales, we say like request more information, educate yourself on our platform, invest in a future partnership that sees the businesses working together.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I completely back up everything that you just said. It makes perfect sense. So just for the people on the call right now, if you're still active, what, Tom, would you say they should be focusing on like right now if you were to summarize?
Right now, I would say the most important is like your core high return on ad spend campaigns, like leave those in market, leave branded campaigns in market. I would say the channels to hit right now are probably Facebook and LinkedIn. Keeping your paid search flat and kind of accelerating that, but testing new things into Facebook and LinkedIn will be the highest value and the lowest CPM.
Okay, yeah, that seems sensible. It's almost like, you know, focus on early in the funnel, so then you've got a big pipeline to nurture when you come out of this. I think one of the points that we were discussing earlier is obviously how consumer behavior has changed. For those continuing to invest in media that might, for example, be using automated bidding strategies or bidding strategies that are specifically optimized around devices, hour of day. Like I know, for example, at Ledger Bennett, we use a number of different bidding scripts on search and social, for example, where we are making bid adjustments based on time of day and device. So what's clear is there's a change in consumer behavior. So it's absolutely critical to go back to any bidding strategies that you're deploying across your campaigns to ensure that the bid adjustments reflect consumer behavior right now, because what's absolutely clear is those have changed. So don't do yourself an injustice by not revisiting those things. Cool. So I want to fire a question over to Greg, based specifically, like, you know, like what are your thoughts, and do you have any advice for the people on this call on how they can like capitalize on this situation?
Yeah, I think it's to pick up on some of the points Tom mentioned already around stay in market on high return campaigns if you can, the core paid search activity and any high quality like remarketing lists on paid social. But for me, this is about setting yourself up for success in half two, where if deals aren't closing in the coming weeks or even in the coming months, based on the sort of lockdown and market sentiment, and also your deal cycles, the opportunity now is really about building quality audiences and quality lists. And that could be everything from traffic to your website that can then be pixeled and retargeted. It could be simple subscription opt-ins with lead ads where you've got a really low gate. It could be ungating content that you've potentially had gated historically to build those lists up, and everything through to typical lead creation. the difference is here is this isn't going to be closed one in the next couple of weeks or potentially couple of months. This is about building leads that then builds to pipeline that then defers your revenue for some point later in this year. Because as Tom's mentioned, the prices of media now are probably lower than they've been in the last 5 years. The difficulty is being able to cash flow and budget that now if it's not going to deliver return in this quarter. So that's where understanding what the opportunities are in the scenarios and how can you really start to build up those audiences that will result in high quality conversations down the road. And that'll come on to some of the scenarios we'll talk through next as well in terms of how you can play that in the coming quarter.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Do you think people should now be investing time building up longer nurtures to appreciate longer deal cycles?
Potentially. I don't necessarily think it's about extending like your pre-MQL nurture sequences. It's about having that in place for when people are ready to buy and you can accelerate them through. But in the meantime, it's about keeping them engaged with whatever's relevant and topical for them now, because what's relevant now is definitely not what was relevant a couple of months ago. So it's about being like empathetic and vulnerable in most cases around what the scenario is and offering them value and support and guidance in that situation. So as when the time comes that they're moving away from, let's say, lockdown or survival mode, and they're starting to say, let's get back to normal and go into growth and target mode, how you're well positioned to be able to start changing that conversation back to one that you may have been having more historically.
Yeah, completely agree. I think which also suggests that people need to reconsider a lot of the messaging that's currently in market today. So like, I think you teased at it there. Growth messaging right now is absolutely not relevant when the most of the market is not growing. Messaging should be pivoted to build trust and to, I suppose, make the audience feel more safe, focus on giving them value without the hard sell. Awesome. I'm going to move on to the next slide, if you can, Phil, which is going to look at how this is changing by industry. Tom, I'd like you to kick us off here and share some insight that you're seeing from the clients from a media perspective, please. If you can give examples of like what are you doing that's really working, that would be super useful, I think.
Sure. So I think just touching on a side note of SEO research that I've seen recently, it's like every business is trying to pivot or kind of innovate their services to approach an online audience. Like think of your 5 best services. Everybody's researching a qualified like remote, online, or from home. So writing content and putting that out is kind of the direction that everything's going. So we've seen a lot of like the technology sector, the financial tech sector, like accelerate forward with those solutions, like taking everything online, making it super easy to digest for everybody in every situation, which has been a huge benefit. We've had a few of our clients that have been fortunate enough that like late February, we started to see a surge of organic traffic that went ahead like 20% week over week, and it kept going. So we identified that as an opportunity, put our foot on the gas pedal and seized on that opportunity. So it was in the hospitality space, pivoting that as like a digital offering. We took the original new product launch for March 1st, and instead of just putting it out steady state like we would have before, we pulled back, kind of reanalyzed the strategy for like a little bit of a softer approach. Since then, we've seen historic months in performance, tested a ton of things, and innovated that will probably spend 30 to 50% more because we're leaning in and kind of riding that wave. And I understand like it's easy for me to say that about this certain sector, but I think the learning from that is just like prospects are looking for businesses to show just like a tiny bit of vulnerability and sympathize with like the current times to reassure them that the certain product or offering that you're putting to market will be assisting in the recovery. Because to be fair, like all of our goals are going to increase or still be there. So we need to figure out a way to kind of hit the audience at a way that they're interested enough to invest.
Yeah, and I think you raise great points. I think what these charts demonstrate is that businesses that are geared up for online selling in its most cases are coping with the COVID situation the best. I think what the charts show is obviously, well, there's a clear increase in spend in the tech sector, and essentially that if you just look directly then straight down to the conversion volume, that's specifically being rewarded. So I suppose where your product fits the market, you have the opportunity to thrive and really capitalize on the circumstances, albeit they're not great for most of the people. Obviously, that it's really easy to talk about what to do when things are working really well, and we're going to go over scenarios that probably well, we're going to cover all of the common scenarios that we're seeing a little bit further on in this webinar. But Greg, for those on this call who are potentially facing budget cuts, what are your recommendations for how they should be handling budget cuts first and foremost?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's different for every client, and that's where we'll go into a couple of different scenarios over the next few slides. Obviously, if you're in a position where you can demonstrate positive return from the activity, tracking down to revenue, tracking down to commercial impact, that helps protect the budgets. But I think the key thing on this is understanding what the change in approach and what the change in strategy is. It can't just be, as we've mentioned a couple of times, to run demo requests if your product isn't something that's like suitable for people to buy in the current market, or difficult for them to buy in the current market. So understanding the type of information people are researching that's relevant for you. And I think to rephrase something Tom said, the content that people are engaging with from a search point of view, and that's working really well in social, it isn't what we would call typical thought leadership. It used to be things like white papers and magic quadrants, and like industry analyst papers. That's not the type of research people are really looking for now. They're looking for practical guidance on what to do in the next couple of weeks, couple of months, couple of quarters, or to solve really specific problems that they're facing in the business now that there probably wasn't content before a couple of months ago because it wasn't even a thing people were thinking about. So I think that's the part for me, Christian. It's changing the approach of what someone's delivering in a way that you're still going to offer value and acquire the audience from it. You're still going to add value to the audience. You're still going to be able to engage with them. You may just not be able to look at it in the way that you were of driving immediate short-term demand.
Absolutely. And I've just caught wind of a question that just came through that's quite poignant for now. The question was, is there going to be a new normal? And I suppose that's really going to be subject to, it's going to be subject to a number of different things. The main two is whatever vertical you're in, and the second thing is what you do now is going to really impact your new normal. If you decide, and we've seen this, people pull completely out of the market, it's going to be a very challenging climate to re-enter, especially when you're going up against people who stayed in the market. I mean, just a specific example from a pure media perspective. The way that media vendors work, they obviously deploy, most people now are running automated bidding strategies. For you to, I suppose, sacrifice all of your learning, your algorithm learning, and then try to re-enter a market, you are really, you've sacrificed a lot of the information that a platform like Google might already have on how your customers engage. So re-entering that, it's going to be a tougher auction without a consideration for like people actually engaging. So it's definitely a tough one. And in terms of, is there going to be a new normal? I think one of the critical things, I think this is going to be a wake-up call for a lot of brands. If you don't, for example, have revenue-based insight into how your marketing is doing, if you can't track a specific marketing campaign and see the impact it's having on your pipeline, it makes this situation 10 times harder, because you could potentially be actively reducing your pipeline by switching off campaigns that are contributing a significant amount to it. So I think really implementing a revenue insights platform has got to be number one on the purchasing list to be able to truly guard yourself from any situation like this that might happen again. We'll come on to the questions and the scenarios a little bit later, but I think that's a fundamental point for me when I've been obviously operating across clients and understanding the revenue impact. So cool. What I want to do now is I want to spend a little bit of time going through, like we've mapped out 4 different scenarios. And I want to spend some time looking at these different scenarios, and essentially what we've prepared is some recommendations for how you can combat each scenario. So hopefully at least one scenario is going to be relatable to your business. And we've kind of like mapped them out here. So there's 4 different scenarios, like I just mentioned. We're going to go through them in order. So number 1 is businesses who are at a complete standstill, where demand has not just dropped, but like the ability for customers to buy is literally not there. The second scenario looks at traditional sales. It might be companies with large field sales teams, maybe in manufacturing, how they're coping. The third bucket, the third scenario is going to be digital businesses that can operate effectively. They have just seen a lot of uncertainty and the pipeline impacted, less severe than scenarios 1 and 2. And then the fourth scenario is going to look at companies that are built for online business that are really quite thriving in this climate, and our recommendations for them around what they can do to capitalize on this growth. Cool. So scenario 1, how to keep moving when you're at a standstill. So and we've put some like most affected industries in here to give you some insight into who these are. But essentially it's people who are unable to trade. They've had to put an immediate pause on spend to support the business, often staying afloat. Buyers are not active. People are fearful for job security. So we've created some scenarios here. We've created some recommendations around how you can act. So if we jump to the next slide, I'm going to pass the baton to Greg to take you through some recommendations.
Thanks, Christian. And I think this first point comes to one of the questions that someone posed. So I'll cover this off now, around looking at customer retention. That yes, if your business definitely isn't in a position to acquire new customers and grow based on the circumstances, the number one thing you should be looking at is customer retention. You should be proactively communicating them, being very open around how COVID-19 is sort of impacting yourself or the industry, but also how you're still there to support them, because they equally want to know that you're going to be there for them after this is over, and how you're going to help them out of that. So looking at how you can improve some of those pieces around customer experience and customer retention. The second part, and I've touched upon this already, is really pivoting where your content focuses might be. So looking at how you can drive a lot more educational, informative value to sort of prospects and leads that might be researching. And Randy, I think this covers your question around where we're seeing an uplift in traffic. It's not around product information at this stage. It's about earlier on informative educational decisions towards the top and the middle of the buyer journey. So looking at how you can tweak that content strategy around practical guidance and practical advice, rather than long-term visionary thinking that people may be focused on thought leadership around. The second couple of points, or third and fourth point, I should say, are really around sweating your assets more. So looking at, can you optimize and refine your web environment, making sure that it has more relevance based on the situation now that people are facing. Back to the point we mentioned about talking about growth versus a more appropriate tone of message now. Is that something that you can update your web pages around, or your landing pages? Or is this an opportunity where you can actually look at what the landing pages should be like when you relaunch the campaign, where maybe you only had a couple of pages, and you say, well, actually, to really scale media in the future, we need a way of having multiple landing pages that tell different stories and are optimized in different ways. So it's a great time to work on some of those areas that improve conversion and performance going forwards. And then the last one is really looking at how you can nurture and keep your pipeline engaged, because there are people that will be interested in buying, they just can't buy now. So this is all about how you can be there for them throughout this, and be the person that they turn to when they get out of the situation they're facing now. So looking at really building up the educational content that sits in nurtures, looking at building up the case studies that are relevant to their sector or their need, or their sub-market, and looking at how you can have sort of playbooks and sales outreach again that support this nurture beyond just a traditional email nurture.
So just to jump in really quick before you go to the next slide, Phil, if you can go back one. I will say for number 2, the content marketing piece, there was a question about like what users are wanting to engage with in terms of copy, content, like your SEO plays. We've seen a lot of people utilize the downtime of their staff. Like if people aren't furloughed and people have additional time to invest internally, turn to your sales team, like have a meeting, sit down, listen to what your customers are saying, like what the biggest FAQs are, what's the biggest pain point for users that are not converting, or what's the biggest disqualification reason, and write posts about that. Like short, quick things that answer a question are huge. They offer so much value. People are researching that a ton. I say kind of look through your search query reports. Well, we look through your search query reports, but in the paid search realm, Google will have a list of all the things that are serving your ads and what people are actually searching for. So that's also a good way to keyword mine and come up with brainstorming and ideas for content to write about.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the critical thing here is just giving as much value to your prospects, your buyers, and your customers. The more you can do, and I think there's a question that just came in, like how do you build better relationships with your customers? I think like communicating with them, like constantly communicating with them and making it absolutely clear your situation and position within COVID. There'll be a lot of concern around whether companies still exist during this time. So making sure that you maintain comms is critical. The second point would be, this is a perfect time to invest in building a better product experience, which again demonstrates how you can come out of this stronger. Cool, thanks, Bill. Okay, this is the second scenario. So this is a situation where sales have plummeted, but targets have not. So like the most affected industries here, manufacturing, like big sales firms, like where should you be placing your bets now to come out of this stronger? Your audience has shifted to the educational phase. How can you maintain front of mind without the ability to go and traditionally face-to-face sell? It's likely that you're facing budget reductions here due to the decline in pipeline and the limited ability to sell. So Greg, if you want to take us through the scenarios and the recommendations for how you might come out of this stronger if you are in this scenario.
Yep, thanks, Christian. So just to pick up on that, these are typically organizations that have face-to-face selling. They will have field sales, they'll have channel partners, and they're used to working with organizations from mid-market all the way up to enterprise. So they will have a more complex sales handled consultative selling approach. And typically the solutions they're trying to solve, there's still a need for them. People are just unable to commit with the current circumstance. So if you jump to the next slide, Phil. The approach here is slightly different to if things are at a standstill. So the first part, and we covered this on earlier around the media piece, but really is to switch to the core activity. Areas where you know that's driving strong demand, strong return on ad spend. It's contributing towards pipeline very well historically, and you're still seeing the right engagement signals now in terms of CPAs and leads being created. And we see that consistently across our clients at the minute, that the cost per acquisition on these leads is maintaining a good level, the quality of leads is at a good level, and if anything, the CPAs are actually reducing. So make sure that core piece is retained and kept on. The second part is this could be an opportunity to refresh the ABM list. So looking at what sectors are actually impacted, you may have companies that you've been targeting as high priorities, as tier 1, tier 2s, named accounts, but their sector doesn't actually mean they can move forwards with sales currently. Whereas there's other sectors that we've already touched upon that are actually in growth phases now, and sort of it's good for business for them. So maybe that's a way that the ABM list can be refreshed and pivoted around those businesses that are still sort of growing currently. Or it could be looking at what industries will be hit the least in the medium to long term, and saying, well, which ones do we need to keep in that list, and which ones should we park currently and be more focused. The third one, again, I'm not going to cover this in detail as I did on the last one, but it's really being focused around engaging the pipeline still, because everyone will still be active. They still have the need. They're just not able to progress this currently now. And then the last one is partnering with sales, and also looking at how, from a digital selling perspective, you can increase non-contact selling. Can you create digital experiences that are virtual demos, that are virtual events, that are sales walkthroughs, demo showroom walkthroughs? Or can you partner with sales to create more enablement or training for them to be able to have sort of non-contact selling delivered remotely, delivered over VC, and make sure they're comfortable, enabled in doing that, because we don't know how long this is going to last, and they're going to need to be able to be productive and function in a way if normal doesn't become the older normal, if the new normal doesn't. So that things where I think if you're facing these scenarios with sales forces, this is a good opportunity for you to focus on some of these things that will then set you up well for half 2.
Yep. Thank you, Greg. Okay, so the third scenario that we want to look at is businesses that are built for online selling, but they're not in a vertical that are specifically thriving. What they're facing is sales have slowed down, cycles are getting longer, people are just not looking to get to sales and make a sale, but due to budgets being cut. So how can you, if you fall in this bucket, come out of the situation stronger? What are our recommendations? So it's in just terms of more scene setting here. So we've got people who are being asked to reduce budget and specifically media spend. What you might be facing is that lead creation is more efficient. It's easier to capture leads at the top of the funnel, but it's a case of how do we balance that with leads not moving through the funnel and pipeline not necessarily getting stronger, but just leads sitting above the pipeline without moving down. Like cash flow is obviously is an issue, and growth targets are negatively impacted without sales closing. So Tom, if you can take us through the recommendations around what this group should be focusing on specifically.
Of course. I think you should focus on the high ROAS campaigns. Definitely identify a core grouping of what drives your sales during the steady state times and maximize that voice of market. So in steady state, you have the luxury of doing experimental campaigns, competitive campaigns, but during like a downturn, you just identify some of those core campaigns. And with that, we kind of pulled back spend in some areas, and we were able to drive a higher quality of a lead and pad the pipeline with our highest quality leads. Growing your audience through thought leadership will be a huge one to capture some of that net new audience for cheaper. When the inventory is cheap, the opportunity is high. The third one would be a repeat. We included this one in every single one just because it's so important right now to capture anyone who's relatively interested in your product. As soon as you get them in the pipeline, you can re-engage them. Like, we've mapped out strategically how to touch a user, like first touch, and then re-engage them in the second touch and the third touch, because we know with this COVID situation, like everything's changing week over week over week. So if you can adjust and update your ad copy based on the situation, I think you'll be way ahead of the game. And then the fourth one is just to amplify existing assets. Paid social, organic social, SEO, all that stuff can be amplified and utilized at the current moment.
Yeah, and just to build on that fourth point, if you want to just jump back, Phil. Yeah, a lot of you might be facing this situation. You might be in this bucket thinking, oh, we don't, assets. We don't have many assets to take to market. Yeah, you're telling us right now that we need to invest in the top of the funnel because it will eventually move down and turn into sales post COVID. What we're saying is like atomize existing assets. Even if assets have previously ran and you know they were successful, how can you bring those back to market to demonstrate more value for your buyers and help them within the research phase? So don't essentially just write off old content, like bring it back. If it worked before, there's no reason it can't do again. Cool. And then the final bucket is the ones that are really thriving in this climate. These are companies that are experiencing accelerated growth. The solutions are in high demand, and what they're finding is sales times are getting quicker. So Tom, if you can walk us through, I guess, how to capitalize if you are thriving in this environment.
Sure. So some of the clients that I work with that have seen revenue growth, we recommend them just lean in. The first thing would be to remove any hurdle from the buyer to the seller. So if they have demos, trials, whatever, just try to get the people in the pipeline. Acquisition growth, like I talked about on the last slide, have the luxury of experiments, non-brand keyword universe, competitive campaigns, broadly targeted strategies, like get everything you can right now, and then know how to segment them and sort them out so you can retarget them accurately. Shift your messaging. We've seen it's pretty easy to shift your messaging just a little bit. Like one headline will do, one piece of the description. I had a client that originally Steady State was all about protecting your business. We tweaked that to protect your remote employees. So like a cybersecurity play, that's brilliant. And we saw the cost per acquisition split in half and the conversion rates double. So it's just small tweaks to let your audience know that you're current and you're sympathetic, you're empathizing with them, can go a really long way. And then the last thing is just like high velocity experimentation. Any channel you want to try, whether it's Snapchat or TikTok, and or just getting on LinkedIn, running your first pilot. Like get on there when the inventory is cheap before everybody starts jumping in, because once everybody jumps in, the CPAs will probably go back to normal as possible. But Steady State, I think, will be interesting.
Yeah, and thanks, Tom. I think, and just to build on that, I think Zoom are a perfect example of how to balance giving your audience the most value when your product is in the highest level of demand. I think the fact that Zoom removed their paywall, essentially, like allowing anybody now to have calls over 40 minutes without having to pay for a subscription, is like a perfect strategy of giving your customer base as much value as they can, whilst also it having a huge long-term benefit to you. So whilst it's tempting to drive revenue, pushing a freemium model to build your volume of users is not a bad idea, because revenue will absolutely follow. Cool. Greg, if you want to take us through, the last slide where we discuss the longer term thinking, and then I think what we can do is for the last 10 minutes talk about questions.
Thanks, Christian. Can you jump to the next slide, Phil? Perfect, bit of a delay. So the last part around this is really to wrap up, and it pulls on a couple of the themes that we've highlighted throughout this. it's really around, unless you are in an organization or an industry that's growing now, it's really about putting the groundwork in to succeed in half two. What are the activities you could be implementing over the next couple of weeks and couple of months that will start to impact revenue, but they probably won't pay off on day one. But it really sets that foundation up that when budgets are released and the targets are still there, how you can chase them down and you're well positioned too, rather than waiting until half two till budgets are released and then you need to launch everything and then work through all of the background activities. There's a couple of operational pieces as well that we haven't touched upon, as they're not really related to campaign activity, but around how you can again set that scene up for you to be able to succeed and sort of drive growth around revenue and pipeline. So the first part is looking at how you can optimize performance. So understanding and really making sure that your reporting infrastructure is robust, your attribution's working, because now's perfect time to go in and fix systems whilst there's low lead flow, where you're fixing it where everyone's running at a full pace and sort of sales are chasing everything. It's really hard to change processes and change systems. So now is one where you can look at how things are tracked, how things are attributed, how data is captured, and how some of the integrations between systems work, to allow you to then visualize what activity is working and optimize based on revenue. Similarly with that, looking at conversations around sales management, sales process, and how you manage leads in the handover processes. Any improvement now will start to play out a lot more down the road when you've got lead flow going through. So again, while volume is low, these fixes are great to implement or improve how leads are managed. And then the last one that we've touched upon numerous times is really looking at how we can nurture leads effectively and sort of retain that pipeline engagement. Because we don't want, while people are spending more time online, to come across one of your competitors that are more helpful, that are offering them more guidance. And that's sort of building up that engagement and loyalty now, so as when they are ready to buy, they flip to someone else. So making sure you are looking after those engaged audiences and pipeline now. And that comes back onto the last part of building an engaged audience, building equity in them, looking after them and helping through them circumstances. So reviewing and refreshing the type of content you're producing and where it gets applied.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. And just to touch on another operational point is, and I suppose it's alluded to in one of the questions, for many verticals and many industries, like going back to normal may take some time. So it's important when you inevitably go through a planning exercise of estimating how many leads, MQLs, and close-won deals and revenue you might find. It's important to do a check back on what your average deal sizes are, your in-funnel conversion rates, because I wouldn't hold yourself to the standard that you did pre-COVID right away.
I would agree with that, and I would add that I think there's going to be a separation of businesses through this. Like some of them will stay current and be up to speed. I think the new normal for personally, like my challenge, is to not have anything be like set it and forget it. It's just like you should be updating and addressing things at least bi-weekly to then update with the current climate. Like that is the minimum, because I think you'll see with all the COVID publications and content and articles, it's just so overwhelming right now. And I think into May and June and July, that's still going to be out there, and people are going to be trying to capitalize on that. But like our solution is to get in front of that and like, let's push everything forward and innovate so that you're ready for the recovery and you're ready to put your foot on the gas when everything becomes like normal again.